much an amateur historian, so just somebody who's very interested and has always been very interested in Chislehurst and the Emperor and Empress. So I hope you'll enjoy this. It's quite light-hearted. I think some of us are going on for a cream tea afterwards with a Victoria sponge and a Eugénie cream puff. So this kind of feels like a nice introduction to your cream tea. So before we get going, I just thought I'd set a little scene. And this is what got me thinking. So I want you to imagine the year is 1891. At this time, Victoria and Eugénie have known each other for 36 years. It's a social gathering at Balmoral. Now, what happens is at the end of the evening, Victoria sort of says to Eugénie, "Oh, you go ahead of me through the door," and Eugénie sort of graciously declines. They then both turn to each other and curtsy in turn. So the Queen is quite elderly, she's a bit crippled, it takes her a little bit of effort. Eugénie is more graceful and youthful beyond her. She's actually older by then, but she's more graceful with it all. And then they go through the door, shoulder to shoulder, but Victoria actually allows her to go an inch or two ahead, treating her as the visiting sovereign. Now, when I read this was written by another visitor, Ethel Smythe, it just made me think, well, you know, they'd known each other for 36 years. What kind of a friendship was it? Were they not just weighed down by ceremony, ritual, protocol? Were their lives not just so ordered and artificial? Could you have a genuine friendship? And then I began to wonder as I was reading, did they really understand each other? And I'll leave that for you to decide. But what I did come away with was they're two remarkable women, and they definitely cared and supported each other. So what did each get from the friendship? That was the next thing I sort of wondered about. Well, Eugénie certainly admired and respected Queen Victoria. She was sort of in awe of her, really, at times. Her manner when she was with Victoria was certainly measured. We've heard from others that she was very fiery, but not in front of the Queen. So she was more measured. She also, certainly once she was exiled, she understood that her social position was due in part to the Queen's friendship. And it's hard to think that somebody with Spanish roots would stay here. I mean, anybody who's spent a winter here, you know, it's foggy over the common, isn't it, and by the cricket. And one of her maids of honour writes, it was trials of being in that great kingdom of rain. So, you know, there must have been something that kept her here. So as for Queen Victoria, what did she get out of the friendship? Well, she certainly, I think her life was enriched because they were unconventional and exotic, the imperial family. It was kind of a bit exciting. And I think she was also sort of flattered by the attention that Napoleon gave to her in the first place. She could also demonstrate some compassion and sympathy in a really positive way, irrespective of what the government was thinking of the day, because this was just personal friends, so whatever was going on with the French alliance at that time. And I think it also shows, I mean, the Empress was deemed to be sort of like the tragic Empress, that was her name. But Queen Victoria loved a bit of melodrama, so I'm sure she was fully involved with that. So that's where we come in from. So I just want to sort of do a little bit of really how did their friendship evolve over time. So that's really what it's all about. I think most people are very familiar with Queen Victoria, so I won't say too much. Born on the 24th of May 1819, which makes her 7 years older than the Empress. Obviously brought up to be queen, strict and controlled childhood. Some people may have heard the expression, the Kensington system. She was sort of confined, she didn't really have many playmates of her own age and so on. But she does grow up to be a considerate and confident monarch in the end, who really did understand her duties. And as I say, anybody who was around her felt this sort of like awe and respect. We've got a lovely painting here by Winterhalter. And I've put a quote. It's actually by Augustin Filon. Now, he's part of the imperial household. He was the Prince Imperial's tutor. And he was around to note their friendship. And of the Queen, he said the Queen was hardworking and methodical, desirous of housing facts in her brain and marshalling them in good order. Now, I want us to contrast that with the Empress Eugénie. So another sumptuous portrait. Oh, thank you. Again by Winterhalter. Now, as we know, the Empress was born 200 years ago today. Her childhood was very different. So she was a bit more of a free spirit, outdoor life, horse riding and so on, and born into Spanish nobility. I think we can say throughout her life she was very courageous, and some would say hot-headed. So, and she marries into the imperial family, so she's not had this she's not been brought up to this particular status. So Filon, who obviously knows her even better than he knows the Queen, says the Empress was impulsive like all her race, but incapable of continuing any regular routine, so very different from Victoria. Quick to perceive a truth which might have escaped a better trained eye, yet losing sight of it again after much reflection and discussion. So we've got two very different personalities here. So, first meetings, state visit. Now, 170 years later, I think we now all understand what a state visit is all about. It was no different then. This was a distraction from stopping Napoleon III taking command in the Crimea War. So it's going to be a formal type of first meeting. It's obviously politically charged. They've got an idea of trying to dissuade him from that. It's very superficial, and any relationships that come out of it are forced by the actual event. But as I say, the most important thing is this is first impressions, and we are talking on a human level. Everybody's either connects or doesn't, so this is still very important. A nice story here is that Eugénie's trunks did not arrive. So on the first night when they're going down to dinner, she hasn't got her dresses. And the other big problem is she hasn't got a hairdresser because he's not arrived either. So what does she do? Well, she could feign that she wasn't feeling very well, which was originally what she was going to do. But then she's like, no, she's Eugénie. She's going to dress up. So she borrows one of her lady's maid's dresses, who then can't obviously attend the dinner. And she gets them to all dress her hair up for her. And she even takes some chrysanthemums that are on the vase on her dressing table and puts those in her hair. Now, Victoria actually thinks this is marvellous. She's endearing because of this lack of ostentation, but it's just a mishap. So actually Victoria is charmed by both the imperial couple. And another important thing, and this is one that she puts great store by, is what Albert thinks. And she writes in her journal, Albert got on famously with the Empress. So from then on, I think we can see that this is going to be a relationship. Now here we've got two pictures from the state visit. The first one is a rare photograph, but as such it's kind of blurred. And then we've also got a nice illustration, of which there were many. However, when I was looking to put this together, there are not that many images of the two of them. And I'm going to hope that you're going to go with this. But if you are of a nervous disposition when it comes to AI, please look away for the next slide, because I've created my own. Okay. Now, I kind of like it. So I think this could be in a Ladybird book. Okay, so having been to Great Britain, there was a return state visit to Paris, and that's what I tried to put together there. There were actually a whole series of beautiful paintings that were put together for the visit, and Napoleon had those sent over to Victoria afterwards. Now, one of those was them arriving in Paris, and going through this beautiful arch of flowers and so on. Now, actually, they arrived late and it was dark. So actually, there was an AI of its time because they completely created that picture. It didn't happen like that. So I kind of feel a little bit vindicated, but there is another AI picture later on in this presentation, which I think shows you a more dangerous side to AI. So, but as I was saying, the main thing here is first impressions. So Eugénie is on her best behaviour. We must also remember she's only been Empress for 2 years and not raised in royal circles. So I think that all sort of blends into this whole thing. But I think the other thing we must remember, when they go to Paris, the Empress is now 2 months pregnant. She's had a few miscarriages, so she isn't at all the events. So they see a lot less of her on the return visit. So 2 years later, there's an actual 4-day informal visit to Osborne House, which I've featured here, which Victoria describes as unpretentious. Now, I think it's all relative, it looks quite grand to me. But I think you'll see that this actually is the seed of friendship here. Although it's informal, there are still politics to be had. So you've got Prince Albert, Napoleon III, and their attendant ministers are off at meetings, and Victoria and Eugénie spend time together. So they'll be out on walks, they'll be chatting, they'll be with the children. And we've got her last child is 4 months old, Beatrice. So they've got plenty of time to sort of get to know each other. By now, Eugénie is actually more confident. She's more experienced, and she's a mother herself. So I think there must be some relief and confidence that she's given the Bonaparte dynasty a male heir. And at this time, her politics appear to align more with those of the royals than with Napoleon. He's actually growing friendly now with Russia. And certainly Britain doesn't think that's a good idea, and Eugénie is not so keen on it either. And I think some of that idea that they're now on the similar wavelength and they are finding Napoleon quite devious means that this letter, I think, probably alludes partly to this. So Queen Victoria writes to the Emperor after the visit, and she says, "In a position so isolated as ours, we can find no greater consolation, no support more sure than the sympathy and counsel of him or her who is called to share our lot in life. And the dear Empress, with her generous impulses, is your guardian angel, as the Prince is my true friend." But it's still not a true friendship, and I'll call this the cooling off relationship here. So France is now moving into naval expansion, which is obviously going to be a big worry. So when there's a royal visit to Cherbourg in 1858, it's certainly more strained. And rather than writing gushing praise in her journals, Victoria can hardly wait to get back to reading her most interesting book, Jane Eyre. So probably the biggest part of their friendship was their shared grief. And this really starts in 1860 with the death of Eugénie's sister, Paca. Now, what makes it worse is that they're on a state visit, the imperial couple, to Algeria. The news comes through and the emperor chooses not to tell Eugénie. So she's dancing and celebrating at parties when her sister's dead. He doesn't want it to disrupt things. So she can't get over that duplicity. We've also got, his affairs and so on. And her sister's died of tuberculosis, and she begins to wonder if she's not ill herself. So by the time they get back to France, I think she's probably heading for a nervous breakdown. So she decides to take a break, and she comes to London. And from there, she goes up to Scotland to visit doctors and to consult with doctors. Now, they give her a clean bill of health. So she comes back down and she wants a private meeting with the Queen and Prince Albert, which she has, and they return the visit by visiting her at Claridge's, where she's staying. But the point here that I want to try and make is that Lord Clarendon wrote after he thought that Eugénie felt it was too informal for such a sad occasion. And I think this is the point, that it is a difference between the personalities, between the warmth and spontaneous Eugénie and the very reserved Victoria. However, that same warmth shows through a year later when Albert dies, and the Queen writes, "The Empress Eugénie is very sympathetic, and I know that she feels and understands my grief. She had great admiration for my angel, and the dear good Albert liked her also." So we now have the widow of Windsor. She's dowdy, she's remote, and at the same time we have the showiest part of the Second Empire. It's all dazzling. So their lives now are very different. They do have the occasional meeting. So in 1867 the Empress visits Osborne, and then there's another occasion when the Queen is travelling to Switzerland, and she goes incognito and she stops in Paris for the day, and the Empress goes from Fontainebleau to see her. But apart from that, we're not really getting this friendship bond at this time. However, that does all change. And I would say this is the turning point. This is the point when it all becomes a really good friendship, a friend in need. So 1870, the Empress flees from France. It's a very scary time, and the Queen is very quick to write to say, "I often think of you during this terrible trial for you and for all that is dear to you. The memory of past times cannot leave me insensible to your great sorrow." She actually sends one of her ladies, Lady Ely, to check things out. So she goes down to Hastings and she reports back, "The Empress is in an uncomfortable smelling hotel at Hastings with hot, disagreeable rooms." So the Queen's definitely not going to go there. So she waits till she gets to Chislehurst, and then she visits along with Beatrice. Beatrice has to follow her everywhere. And then she's invited back to Windsor. Now, we could say that this is all just fantastic friendship. You could also be pragmatic, you might say cynical, but was the Queen also interested in learning firsthand what was going on? You've still got the Empress being regent for part of the time when she's first moved here, and then she goes off to meet with Napoleon whilst he's in captivity. So I'm sure she wanted to get to know the up-to-date gossip, as it were. But it is a trying time for the Empress, and Victoria writes, "She was all gentleness and submission." Now, I think that also shows the moderated language, because if you read some of the things from the household at the time, they talk about her storming around, ranting about all those who failed the imperial cause. So I think we've still got a mismatch there in behaviour. And now, here is the next AI. I think this one is probably a little bit more dangerous. It does actually look like a proper photograph. So I'll leave it to you as to whether you think AI is a good thing. Okay, so Napoleon joins the family here, and they carry on seeing Victoria, and Victoria visiting here. They're also invited to Buckingham Palace to see a procession of thanksgiving for the Prince of Wales's recovery in 1872. But then when Napoleon dies in 1873, you now have both of these ladies joined together in widowhood. Due to political considerations, Victoria doesn't attend the funeral, and in fact nobody from the royal family actually attends, but she does pay her respects afterwards, and she's consoling the Empress. So we've now got this empathy between them, and Queen Victoria starts taking a much more of an interest in the Prince Imperial and his military career. There are even rumours, because wherever the Queen goes, so does Beatrice, that perhaps Beatrice and the Prince Imperial might one day get married. To a very poignant year in their friendship, 1879, with the death of the Prince Imperial. Obviously, this was one of the heaviest blows for Eugénie. She was not only losing her son, her only son, but all her dreams of returning to imperial majesty were gone with this. They had hoped that he would take on the role and become Emperor of the French one day, Now, is she a nothing? So Victoria returns early from Balmoral on hearing the news, and within 3 days of the news, she is at Eugenie's side in Chislehurst. Eugénie is not eating or drinking or sleeping very much, so she gets her doctors to attend to her. And Victoria is determined that there's going to be a magnificent funeral for the Prince Imperial. So she makes certain that they have a very impressive procession. She's here for that. And she is pleased with the results. She then offers that Eugénie comes and stays at Osborne, which she declines, but she does later accept an invitation to Abergeldy, and I think they'll have to agree it's stunning scenery there. It's very close to Balmoral. It's somewhere where she can go and be quiet. She just goes with one of her maids and other servants to keep the house, and the only visitor is Queen Victoria. So this is probably the point of really deep friendship. Now, Victoria does visit, sometimes accompanied by John Brown, and there is one occasion when he goes out, catches some trout, and by the time they come back from their walk, he's cooked it for their tea. So I think we're now into really personal friendship. Now, if you were at Ian's talk in March, you will have known about the pilgrimage to Zululand, and there was a clear theme of Queen Victoria's involvement throughout that whole pilgrimage. And this was actually down to the smallest detail. So when Eugénie arrives at Cape Town, there's a telegram of welcome from Queen Victoria. And as we also know, she actually arranged for the place where Prince Imperial died to be cleared and a cross erected. And Filon wrote about this: the peaceful and orderly appearance of an English cemetery instead of that wild ravine which had witnessed a scene of death and carnage. The Empress thus experienced a bitter disappointment. So an act of kindness by the Queen was viewed as disappointing by Eugénie, and I think this just demonstrates that they weren't on the same page, they weren't like-minded, and one assumes if she was disappointed when she got there, it hadn't been discussed beforehand. But the Queen also, she's really tactful and diplomatic, because whilst Eugénie is on her pilgrimage, there's a controversy over a memorial to the Prince Imperial, which Queen Victoria wants to be in Westminster Abbey, but Parliament vote it down. So Eugénie obviously is upset by this, and the Queen tactfully says, no, I never wanted it to be at Windsor, at Westminster Abbey. I wanted it to be at the chapel at Windsor all along, and that's the special place, that's where my loved ones are, and it's important. So she smooths over what could have otherwise been a very heartbreaking moment for Eugénie. So the years roll by, and it's a constant friendship. There's a regular pattern of visits, whether it's Osborne, Balmoral, their respective properties on the Côte d'Azur, and Eugénie also moves to Farnborough Hill. Victoria is a regular visitor there, and it's easy travel from Windsor. And the pair last meet in the summer of 1900, and in January 1901, when the Queen passes away, Eugénie writes, "It is an immense loss to me. She was a friend close to my heart, always good and affectionate, a support in my checkered life. I have never felt more strange or alone in this country. I am profoundly sad and dispirited." So leave the last words to Filon, who I think puts it quite nicely, having really observed them. They were very different in character and habits, and time rendered the contrast more striking. The one woman was very reserved, the other very imprudent, but both were incapable of deceit. They had reached the age when one esteemed sincerity about everything. Thank you.